Follow the trend, tend to benefit while avoiding harm. Hello everyone, this is Mr. D. Today, I want to give you a brief introduction to the images represented by the 12 terrestrial branches. In the last video, I briefly introduced the images of the 12 slideshows. In this video, I will briefly introduce the images of the 12 terrestrial branches. It is very important to know what each symbol represents and what the combination of symbols represents. We judge the development of things by analyzing those different meanings of various symbols. Because I want you to get to know the images of the 12 terrestrial branches as soon as possible, I will not introduce in too much detail why these terrestrial branches represent these images. After watching this video, you may find some different terrestrial branches have the same image. Each terrestrial branch has unique characteristics. We must pay more attention to the characteristics of each terrestrial branch and the types of events to be predicted. In this video, I will briefly introduce each terrestrial branch, and in my future videos, I will also give a full detailed introduction to each terrestrial branch. Because A is the home of the Queen of Heaven, so A has most of images of the Queen of Heaven. A represents all mysterious things. Among the various methods of divination in China, the North Star has an important position. The North Star is in the north, and the direction represented by the A is the north. So many of the images represented by the A come from the North Star. The ancients set the north as the beginning, and at the beginning often decided the direction of development. So A represents leader, parent, elder, emperor, god. A also means a devil. What kind of devil it is depends on what A's earth plate is. Some images of A come from Xu, so A also has images related to funerals and death. The time represented by A is midnight, and people are sleeping at midnight, so A has the image of a bedroom. The 5 elements of A are water, so many images of A are derived from this. A represents sea, lake, ditch, blood, all creatures in the water, etc. A has the image of fluidity, and the diseases it represents are hypertension, anemia, blood cancer, etc. A represents all kinds of women and all kinds of things related to women. A represents fertility, so it also means children. A represents smart, scheming, smart but not necessarily decent. It also represents delusion, seeing the wind makes the rudder, drifting with the flow, seeing the strange and changing, not a credible person. Next are the images of summarized by ancient Chinese people. Because B is the home of the Lord of Heaven, so B has the most of images of the Lord of Heaven. B represents a picture of rural life and the thinking mode of rural people, and B represents houses, farmland, crops in farmland, wild vegetables, and soybeans. B represents animals, cattle, etc. used to cultivate the land. The peasants in ancient China believed that there are gods in the underground. At the end of autumn, the peasants would use sacrifices to thank the gods of the land for their blessing for making them a good harvest. So B has the image of an ancestral hall, the tombs of ancestors, pigs and sheep for sacrifice, monks and nuns, etc. The respected people in the countryside are the noble elders. They are the fathers or elders of everyone. Therefore, B can represent the elder man, and sometimes B is directly regarded as father. Because the shape of the word 丑 is very similar to the belly, so B represents belly and uterus. B represents all the images related to land and houses, such as agriculture, shops, gates, real estate, etc. B represents the images of cursing in secret, and hating in secret. Next are the images of summarized by ancient Chinese people. Because C is the home of the Azure Dragon, so C has most of the images of the Azure Dragon. The Chinese name of C is Yin, also known as Gongcao. Gongcao was a kind of official name in ancient China. Its duty is to record the merits and faults of other officials for a year. Therefore, C represents documents, books, letters, contracts, notice, appointment letters, official documents, etc. C represents all officials and supervisors. C represents an educated person, older person, a person with a certain prestige, or experience in a certain range. And sometimes C also represents a father. When predicting someone's relationship status, C appears in the 4 lessons or the 3 transmissions, which means that the man may be an older person and may even have a marriage history and children. Because the attribute of C is wood, it represents all wood products and paper products. Because wood can be sold for money, C also represents money. Because wood can make a fire, C represents stove, brazier, incense burner, engine, etc. Because wood can provide fuel for the fire to continue to burn, C represents food. Because C has the image of the mountain trigram, the mountain trigram represents mountain, so C represents mountain forest. C is one of the 4 months, and the 4 months are on corners, so C represents things with horns. Next are the images of summarized by ancient Chinese people. Because D is the home of the 6th combination, so D has most of the images of the 6th combination. The area of D in the sky contains 3 constellations, which are 底宿, 房宿, 星宿. So most of these images come from these 3 constellations. So D represents the doors and windows of questioner's house. D represents change, anxiety, elasticity. D represents roads, intersections, bridges, and other things related to traffic. D represents all houses and shops. In our actual prediction, when you meet D at the 4 lessons and the 3 transmissions, we first judge that the matter is related to changes, travel, and the questioner's family. Because C sometimes represents the father, so D sometimes represents the mother. There are many branches of trees, so D has the image of children. Because the attribute of D is wood, D also represents wood. Unlike C, D generally represents slender wood. In actual predictions, D can also be represented as vibration, impulse, strength, destruction, sadness, knife. Next are the images of summarized by ancient Chinese people. Because E is the home of the hook chain, so E has most of the images of the hook chain. The images of the E mainly come from the handle of the Big Dipper. The ancient Chinese used the 12 terrestrial branches to divide the sky into 12 areas. 角宿 and 抗宿 are in the area of E, so most of images of E come from them. Because the Big Dipper was considered by the ancients to be the car of the gods, the image of E is from the handle of the Big Dipper, so E represents the carriage and the handlebar used to control the vehicle. Because the ancients discovered that the handle of the Big Dipper points to a fixed position, the weather becomes the corresponding season. So the person represented by E has the right to control other people, leaders, general, etc. Powerful people must be very rich, so E also represents money. The lunar calendar represented by E is March, which is the period when all things grow. So E represents great power, and E represents gathering, masses, enthusiasm, excitement, and fighting. If divination is related to pregnancy, if the celestial on E is the Queen of Heaven, and E appears in the 4 lessons or the 3 transmissions, it means that the fetus will be damaged. E is the generals of the month of August, and August is autumn. Death row prisoners in ancient China were generally beheaded in autumn, so E represents grief, worry, killing, and death. Because E includes 角宿 and 抗宿, these 2 constellations represent the strategic paths in the heaven, so E represents strategic paths, block. Because E represents prison in the heaven, E has the image of a lawsuit prison. Because 底宿 represents the residence of the emperor, the part of 底宿 is in the area of E, so E represents the house. Next are the images of summarized by ancient Chinese people. Because F is the home of the winged snake, so F has most of the images of the winged snake. F is the most vigorous yang energy in the 12 terrestrial branches. Starting from F, yang energy begins to slowly decline. The tribute of F is fire. 义秀 and 枕秀 are in F's area. Most of F's images comes from these factors. F represents nightmare, daydreaming, false alarm. The tribute of F is fire, which burns upwards, so F represents flying insects and birds. The tribute of F is yin, and the yin fire is easy to flutter. This kind of fire is like lust. So F represents fornication, frivolousness, things you don't want to be known about, adultery, rape, etc. Because F represents mouth, talkative, bad-mouthing, struggle, frivolous, arrogant, and swearing, especially when F appears in the 4 lessons or 3 transmissions and restrains the symbols under the 1st or 3rd lessons. It is recorded in many ancient books that F and the winged snake represent flying catastrophe, which are unexpected disasters. F represents weirdness. This weirdness is abnormal, things that do not fit most situations and things that do not fit similar appearances. Because the flames fluctuate, F represents worry, doubt, and fright. Since ancient times required fire to make metal, F represents furnace, smelting, kiln, or something from the kiln, such as porcelain, bricks, tiles, cement, bottles, lime, etc. In the book of divination examples, 大六壬断案, the image of F representing the shop is used very much. Next are the images of summarized by ancient Chinese people. Because G is the home of the vermilion bird, so G has most of the images of the vermilion bird. The attribute of G is fire, because Liu Xiu, Xing Xiu, and Zhang Xiu are in the area of G. So most of the images of G come from them. The time period of G is the highest point of the sun, so G represents sun, king, elders, kind people. Because the attribute of G is fire, so G represents ignition, excitation, and stimulus. Because the attribute of G is fire, G represents everything related to fire. Because Jiangsu represents the ancestral temple, so G represents parents or tall houses. Because in ancient China, noon was the time when the bazaar started, so G represents bazaar, transaction, and street shop. G is the Wang Liangxing in the heaven. In the legend of the ancient Chinese, Wang Liangxing is responsible for managing horses in the heaven, so G represents horses, equestrians, and riders. Because the ancients only used horses when traveling, G has the image of traveling. G represents guards, troops in the capital. G represents all kinds of women, well-dressed and very beautiful women. G represents silkworm, sericulture woman, silk. Because a part of Yixu is in the area of G, Yixu is on behalf of the Heavens Music Bureau, so G represents opera, drama, singing, and acrobats. Because G's yang fire is the hottest and brightest, G represents the star among the politicians, the star in the economic field, and the star in the show business. In the area of G, there is a 内平星, which represents law enforcement, so G represents lawsuits, business affairs, and integrity. Because the flame is swaying when it burns, G represents people with many thoughts, people with many actions, and a flag. Because G represents red, G represents blood, slaughter. Next are the images of summarized by ancient Chinese people. Because H is the home of the great tradition, so H has most of images of the great tradition. The great tradition represents the ribbon, and the ribbon is the part of the official certificate in ancient times. H represents the official seal. H represents banquet, marriage, sacrifice, nun, Taoist. Because H represents sacrifice, the ancient way of sacrifice was that people compete in front of a statue of a god. So H also represents the meaning of an arena. China developed temple fires because of this sacrificial ceremony, and ancient Greece developed the Olympic Games because of this sacrificial ceremony. The doctor represented by H is different from normal doctors. The doctor represented by H is a witch doctor who uses mysterious methods and predicts the future to treat patients. Because the attribute of H is earth, and the taste represented by H is sweetness, H represents all sweet things that grow from soil. There is 九旗星 in the area of H, so H represents wine, brewers or pubs. H represents guarantor, nanny, intermediary, matchmaker. Because H represents earth trigram, so H represents woman, old people, aunts, sisters-in-law, sisters, and people who take care of others, kind people. H represents loneliness, so H has the image of a widow. H represents relatives, friends. These images are frequently used in the cases in the book 六刃断案. H represents yard, wall, garden. Because there is Cancer in the area of H, H represents seafood. H represents clothes, hats, work clothes, dresses. H represents music, all musical instruments. H represents people who love to eat food, love to drink, and are good at cooking food. Next are the images summarized by ancient Chinese people. Because I is the home of the white tiger, so I has most of the images of the white tiger. Because I is the home of the white tiger, I represents death, corpse, mausoleum, funeral home, and mourning clothes. Because I is the home of the white tiger, so I has the image of punishment and authority. I represents senior judges, professions related to criminal law, lawyers, etc. Because I is the generals of the month of April, and April is the beginning of summer, when everything is flourishing, the yang energy has developed to its apex. When the yang energy reaches its apex, the yang energy begins to drop, and the yin energy is slowly produced. Because the yin and the yang energies in April are transmitted and passed in, and I is the general of the month of April. The Chinese name of I is called 传送, which means transmission. Because I is the general of the month of April, I represents handovers, alternations, upcoming changes, everything that is elastic. It can be seen from the Chinese name of I that I represents transmission, 传递, impart, 传授, propagate, 传播, transmit orders, 传令, convey, 传达, communication, 传讯, legend, 传说, tradition, 传统, rumors, 传言, spread, 传扬, infect, 传染, pass round for perusal, 传阅. I most commonly used images are journey, information. It is necessary to pass the road to transmit the flow of people and materials, so I has the image of a road. I represents the person who sends the order, the person who is away from home, and the person who wants to go home, because these people have to go through the road. I has the image of passing on from generation to generation, so I represents descendants. I has the image of going round and round, so I represents circle, turning, around, grinding, the turntable at the crossroads. I represents people who often need to travel on business, merchants, hunters, soldiers, tourists, postmen, and patrolmen. Because the attribute of I is metal, I represents all metal products, gold, silver, silversmith, blacksmith, jewelry industry, financial industry, banks, merchants, etc. Next are the images of summarized by ancient Chinese people. Because J is the home of the great clandestine, so J has most of the images of the great clandestine. J has the meaning of following others, so J represents secondary, second class, secretary, attendant, supporter, and a person who makes the rudder by the wind. If we meet J in the prediction about exam, it means that we can only get second. If we meet J in the prediction about interview, it means that we will not be admitted, but our grades will be very good. 文曲星 is in the range of J, so J represents exam. J represents things that are not clear, people who are not cheerful, people who are not decent, places that are not bright, and places that are not warm. J represents separation, isolation, fracture, killing, crusade. D and J both represent the gate. The difference between them is that D is the front gate, and J is the back gate, which is the hidden private gate. J represents private door, which means that bad things may come out of the private door, and it also means that pie is falling from sky. Because J represents gold, silver, and wine, J also represents rewards. J represents knife, needles, axes, saws, and bladed tools. J represents slave and maidservant. In today's society, J represents female staff, nanny, part-time worker. 卯宿 is in the area of J. 卯宿 is the ears and eyes of God, so J represents information. Because the 未宿 is in the area of J, J represents warehouse. The salaries distributed by ancient government to officials were grains in the warehouse. So J represents official salaries. J represents all kinds of women. J represents wine, wine jar, wine bottle, wine maker, wine cellar. If J's celestial is the hollow sky, J represents the little slave. Because the hollow sky represents knowledgeless, empty, and innocent. J represents death, funeral, white clothes. When J's celestial is the white tiger, J most often represents the clothes worn at the funeral. J is a concubine, girl, mistress, lover. These images are often fulfilled in the actual predictions. J represents the loss of property and harm to the body due to drinking and lust. J represents jewelry, pearls, mirrors, rulers, earrings, etc. J represents hard and shiny things, photos, certificates, cards, etc. In the actual predictions, the intensity of the change represented by J is much stronger than I. When J's celestial is the Hokshen, that represents the cycle of the dispute. Because the Hokshen represents implicated and J represents split, together they represent the cycle of the disputes. Next are the images of summarized by ancient Chinese people. Because K is the home of the hollow sky, so K has the most of the images of the hollow sky. The attribute of K is earth. Because Kui Xiu and Lou Xiu are in the area of K, so most of K's images come from them. Because there is Lou Xiu in the area of K, Lou Xiu represents the prison in the heaven, so K represents the prison officer, judge, and the prison. When K's celestial is the Hookchen, we can be sure that it represents these kinds of images. K represents Tianshu Xing. If K's state is vigorous and powerful, then K has the image of a leader. If K's status is not vigorous and powerful, then K represents handyman, slave, and a person of low social status. The disease represented by K is lung disease. Because the attribute of K is earth and the taste it represents is sweet, K sometimes represents dry food. K is the general of the month of February, and February is the time for everything to accumulate strength and wait to break through the ground. And in the area of K, there is Lou Xiu, which represents gathering. So K represents a lot of things, a lot of guns, a lot of troubles, an army. Because Kui Xiu is in the area of K, Kui Xiu represents the arsenal of weapons in the heaven. So K represents the army. K represents organization, association, agreement. When the three transmissions are KFD, this kind of course is called Course of Casting Official Seal. When we divination about whether we can get an official position, this kind of three transmissions means that we can get it. K represents messy places, dirty people, dirty things, toilets. K represents the city, the community, the market, the common people, and the bottom members of the organization. K represents fierce appearance, grumpy, butcher, hunter. If K is the first transmission, it means that the previous things happen again. Meaningless consumption, loss of property, and things are related to many people. When divination is about a person's condition, if K appears in the 4 lessons or the 3 transmissions, it means that the patient may have been cursed or given a mysterious spell. K represents distant places, remote places, rural areas, and mountainous villages. K represents the prosecutor. K represents official seal. The great tradition represents ribbon. When K's celestial is the great tradition, this means that the seal and ribbon are complete. When our divination is whether we can get an official position, if this kind of K appears in the 4 lessons or the 3 transmissions, it means that we can get it. Next are the images summarized by ancient Chinese people. Because Isle is the home of the black tortoise, so Isle has most of images of the black tortoise. Isle represents heaven, space, and universe. Isle represents the gate of heaven. When the Lord of Heaven's earth plate is Isle, it is called the Lord of Heaven has boarded the gate of heaven, which is a very auspicious omen. Because the attribute of Isle is yin, Isle is the last of the 12 terrestrial branches, and the yin energy of Isle is the strongest. So Isle represents mysterious, weird, devil, God, things that you don't want to be known by others, unspeakable secret, thieves. Because the month represented by Isle is October, and October is winter, everything is hidden in winter, so Isle represents warehouses, books, and paintings. Isle represents pillar, pavilion, tall building. Because Pisces is in the area of Isle, Isle represents a pair of objects, organs, for example, gloves, ears, breasts, pliers, scissors. Isle represents summon, call, request. The people who are called up may be officials, rich people, soldiers, etc. Someone is asked to be the management, someone is invited to the meeting. L represents drowning. Someone is addicted to something, someone is addicted to a certain emotion. Because the attribute of L is water, L represents all creatures in the water. When the water washes the dirty things, it becomes more and more dirty. So L represents all dirty people, dirty objects, dirty places, and dirty incidents. L represents ask for, take. L represents escaped people, lost animals, and lost money. L represents young son, lady, distinguished guest, drunk person, beggar. Because L represents the heaven, L represents the circle covering things above the head, tents, mosquito nets, umbrellas, leads, rings. Next are the images of summarized by ancient Chinese people. Knowing that every terrestrial branch has so many images, don't be scared by them. In actual predictions, the relationship between each symbol and the symbols below the first lesson determines the good or bad of the matter, and the celestial above each symbol determines the specific things that will happen. Let me give you two examples. In this course, the attribute of first transmission is fire, and the attribute of the symbol under the first lesson is wood. Wood generates fire. The symbol below the first lesson represents the questioner, so we can judge that this is going to be a consumption on the questioner. Why is the questioner consumed? We see what celestial in the first transmission is the sixth combination, so we can judge that the questioner will be consumed for doing business. In this course, the attribute of the first transmission is wood, and the attribute of the symbol under the first lesson is earth. Wood restricts earth. The symbol below the first lesson represents the questioner, so we can judge that this is going to be a harm on the questioner. Why is the questioner harmed? We see what celestial in the first transmission is the Hokshen, so we can judge that the questioner will be harmed for lawsuit. We are judging what will happen next. We must combine the images of the celestial and the terrestrial branches, and use our logical reasoning ability and imagination, and the types of events we predict to speculate what will happen next. Subscribe. Be your own prophet.